I will call this regular meeting of Council of the Municipality of Jasper to order for February 16th. Councillors, you have today's proposed agenda. Are there any additions, deletions, or other changes to be made to the agenda? Seeing nothing, may I have a motion, please, to approve the agenda as presented? Thank you, Councillor Connaught. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. The minutes of the regular meeting of February 2nd, 2021 have been circulated. Are there any errors, omissions, or corrections required to be made to those minutes? Councillor Demota.
Number 35 in the minutes with reference to the skate park. It says 7 voted in favor and 2 against, and that's physically impossible. So I just thought I'd make note of that. I think it should be 5 and 2.
Thank you. Although that kind of ruins the idea of vote early, vote often.
True.
But well noted. Thank you. Councillor Demota. If there is nothing else, might I have a motion to approve the minutes of the February 2nd, 2021 meeting, subject to correcting the addition of the numbers for votes on item 3521. Your motion, Councillor Demota? Okay, thank you. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Right, we have 3 presentations this morning, each of them verbal. I will turn it to Mr. Given to speak to each of the matters and to present the other presenters who I see or did see on the screen at least. Mr. Given, go ahead.
Sure. Thanks very much, Your Worship. Yes, Council, we have 2 presentations this morning from external parties. Both of them are on items that Council is, I think, well aware of, but really are in the nature of a progress update to help Council get an inside view of the progress that's been made to date on each project. And both really set the stage for decisions that will come to Council in the coming weeks and months. The first is with respect to the Connaught site servicing feasibility study. As Council will remember, you did give administration some direction to provide options on how to move forward with servicing what we're commonly calling the GC site, and consideration of the potential of servicing GB and GA. Collier's project leaders were engaged in 2020 to assist JCHC in advancing the concept of affordable housing on that site. They have been working closely with JCHC, as Councillor Butler can attest, to advance the vertical construction, the building project, and the submission of the grant to the Rapid Housing Initiative. Colliers is intimately familiar with the project, and as a part of their JCHC involvement, they were able to provide us with some high-level site feasibility, servicing feasibility study information. Chris is going to present some of that overview to you, and it is what will start to form the basis of the recommendation administration will bring forward. I believe we had committed on February 23rd. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Timmins from Collier's Project Leaders. And I think Chris may have a bit of a presentation and he may do share screen. But Chris, take it away.
Thank you, Bill. Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you all. I feel a little underdressed with my background. Looks like you guys do this quite regularly. So good to see you all, though. Just wanted to touch briefly on kind of what we're doing with the JCHC and Parcel GC and offsite services in particular with this. So as you're aware, the Connaught Affordable Housing Project is about providing safe, private, comfortable, and affordable homes for those who need it in this community. There's been a lot of work done already so far on the site. As the municipality's trusted partner, Collier's Project Leaders has led the on-site geotechnical investigation. We've also led the topographical survey and environmental site assessments for Site GC. Our advisory services team has also been instrumental in helping secure $250,000 in seed funding for this on-site development. And in December 2020, our advisory services team, on behalf of the JCHC, submitted an application to the CMHC for funding under the Rapid Housing Initiative program. So for those that aren't familiar, the Rapid Housing Initiative is a federal program through the CMHC that aims to provide capital funding to address urgent housing needs of vulnerable Canadians. It's a very aggressive program. Its goal is to commit $1 billion in capital contributions by March 31st of this year for the construction of 3,000 permanent affordable homes across the country, all of which are to be completed and ready for occupancy within 12 months of signed funding agreements, which is a lot of work to get done in a short period of time. So what does this mean for Jasper? If the Rapid Housing Initiative funding application is successful, Jasper would see the construction of 40 affordable housing units adjacent to the Petro-Canada on Connaught Drive, and it would be ready for occupancy in mid-2022. As we were working through the on-site scope with Councillor Butler and the JCHC, we noted one of the biggest risks, though not insurmountable, is the lack of municipal services to adequately serve the site. So we're talking water, storm sewer, sanitary sewer, and all of this needs to be done before people move into the affordable housing development next year. So you can appreciate the amount of work that needs to be done to make this happen. Jasper is a very unique municipality. Permits and other regulatory requirements that are specified by Parks Canada can be quite onerous sometimes. Selective tree clearing that respects migratory bird windows. Surveys of other site investigations not yet completed specifically for the site servicing areas outside of parcel GC. We have the procurement of a design team and the completion of an engineered design for those municipal services. We also have the procurement of a contractor to do the work and construction itself, which is estimated to take roughly 2 months worth this year. And we also have to tie into all the new on-site development on GC. So over the last few weeks, Collier's Project Leaders and the municipality have been working with a civil engineering firm to conduct a feasibility study for these municipal offsite services. And while this study is still underway, the goal is twofold here. First, we need to define the scope of the complete work to fully service parcels GA, GB, and GC, kind of the ultimate design. And secondly, determine an estimated order of magnitude cost to design and construct this work. So I'm going to do a quick screen share here to show you kind of what we have done so far. Bear with me here. Trust you guys can see the Connaught Drive and parcels GA, GB, and C there. So what we have shown in solid blue along Connaught Drive is the new water line that would ultimately serve the 3 parcels. And the unique challenges with municipal water is that it has to be looped and circulating at all times, so there's no dead end spots. So you'll see tie-ins at Willow, Pine, and Spruce, as well as it connects to an existing line at Hazel. So all that just kind of keeps things flowing. This is the ultimate design. Definitely don't have to go all the way with this quite yet, but that's ultimately what it would look like. We have, we've kind of come up with an option to serve just parcel GC at the time, and I have kind of put some costs together, rough cost estimates for that as well. So what you're seeing here is just what would be phase 1 if this was a phased approach was chosen, just to get that work done. And then moving to sanitary sewer. Again, here is an ultimate design for sanitary sewer that serves all 3 parcels. We have an existing stub at the corner of Petra Canada here. And we would tie into that and run out front of all 3 parcels. Again, that's the ultimate design. And if a phase design and construction was more preferred, we would just go with parcel GC for now. So to that, we had to come up with some costs for these, and just to kind of get the conversation started, an estimated order of magnitude, given the information that we have at hand and what we know, completing the ultimate build out for services for all 3 parcels, design and construction, is looking at roughly 3.3 million. Again, this doesn't all have to be done at once. In a phased approach, you'd be looking at roughly 1.57 million for just doing parcel GC, and the remaining services under a phased approach or phase 2 would be roughly 1.87 million. There's obvious economies to be had by doing it all at once. There's pros and cons to each option, which we could get into a little bit later on, but it would ultimately be a decision that would have to be made. At the end of the day, this is an integral part of the on-site development for the Jasper Community Housing Corporation. Without adequate municipal site services, there would be no occupants within 12 months, and really would preclude the JCHC's ability to secure funding under the Rapid Housing Initiative. So though they are exclusive projects and separate from them, they are quite intimately tied to each other, and the on-site work really can't go anywhere without servicing here. So pretty key. So that's really all I wanted to share at this time. If there was any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them. I'll open up the floor, I guess.
Thank you, Mr. Timmons, for that presentation, and I too will simply redirect your request for questions to councillors. Councillor Wilson.
My question was to the timeline for construction. I think you had made mention to 2 months worth of construction. Is this just for the undergrounds, and is that, or what would the timeline be for either the phased approach or the full build out? Yeah,
so for ultimately, we're kind of looking more to the phase or to the full build out for this, just because it does have to get done eventually. There are a lot of pros to doing a full build out, and just given the uniqueness of Jasper, there's a lot of obstacles to navigate around. Squirrels and birds is one of them, so we can't really do anything until we know that it's free and clear of migratory birds and burrowing ground squirrels, right? So that puts us into July, really at the earliest that any underground construction could start for these offsite municipal services. Given the tourist season in Jasper, and Connaught's a busy road, obviously we're planning to push construction later into the season, probably August, September, October, depending on kind of where things fall with permits and all those sorts of things. We are anticipating a 2-month schedule for a full build out for the complete ultimate design. So yeah, it would be a later start for construction, just to kind of navigate some of those unique challenges of Jasper. If this was anywhere else, we'd probably get started as soon as we could. So.
Thank you for that. Go ahead, Councillor Wilson, with a follow-up.
Yeah, sorry, just a follow-up. I'm sure you've probably thought about it, but I see some pretty major challenges with doing the underground services at the same time as doing the construction. Definitely because of the access to site, etc. Has there been discussion about that? I find throwing both of these projects out in a 1-year timeline is quite aggressive, and I'd love to see it happen. I also see the challenges in making it happen.
Absolutely, a lot of risks with doing such a volume of work at the same time. Understanding the timeline of and the commitment that we're held to with the Rapid Housing Initiative funding, should that be successful, it really would be necessary to have construction start for the offsite services while the on-site work is going on. So those are two areas that need to be coordinated quite closely. And, you know, we would anticipate a lot of work overlapping on the site. And, you know, there is a lot of challenges with doing that. So it's definitely been noted and will be managed going forward.
Thank you for that. Other questions? In the absence of hands up, I just had a couple of questions, and then I think I saw Councillor Butler and Mr. Given as well. Firstly, and perhaps Mr. Given is better situated to respond to this, but I'm interested to know whether there are any ongoing discussions, and if so, what the status of those discussions might be for the applicant for parcel GB, and whether there are ongoing discussions about coordinating efforts with that private outfit to bring in the services for at least GB and GC, if not GA.
Yes, Your Worship, I can speak to that. At this stage, we have been focused on essentially getting high order design and costs so that we would have some basis to start to have those discussions. We appreciate that there is private interest, and that will be something that council will want to consider when they think about phasing. You know, as Chris showed, you know, there is sort of a minimum phase to be able to service GC. We will be able to come to council with a recommendation that highlights what the overall cost would be to also provide services to GB and potentially GA, but that would obviously be well into the future in my imagination. But once we have some basic understanding of what the incremental cost is to service that private development, it will give us an opportunity to have that conversation with the private parties that are interested in that property.
Thank you very much. And my second question, related in a sense, and that is related to coordinating efforts with third parties. Based on Councillor Wilson's greater knowledge of the challenges of this dual construction, has anybody started any discussions with CN, who is an adjacent property owner and has an access road? If I can well imagine that access from Connaught would be restricted when you're putting in underground services, but if builders need construction to the site, it's possible potentially to gain access from that CN road. Previously, when we built the pedestrian underpass, our people worked really well with CN's engineers for that, but it was a challenge to get the agreements in place, and lots of lead time was required. So I'm just wondering whether anybody has looked at the potential of getting CN on board early on. Mr. Timmons, looks like you already have.
Well, no, you know what? I was going to say we have at this time not engaged with CN. There is, you know, given the work that's ahead of us, there aren't any crossings of CN property at this point. I know a lot of the infrastructure that was put in before crossed the CN, you know, going under the tracks, and any crossing agreement, especially with the train company, is a lot of work. So we haven't actually engaged in conversation with CN at this time yet, but we will be definitely reaching out to them as needed, just to keep them aware at this point. Just, you know, we are partnered, you know, neighbors to their properties, right? So it's the neighborly thing to do, and I don't foresee any challenges at this point, just because we aren't crossing or encroaching their property. It'd be a courtesy at this point to get them involved and keep them in the know, so they know what's going on. But definitely will be.
Your Worship.
Fair enough. And I simply thought that it might be beneficial if we had access to the site on their road. Mr. Given, you had your hand up. Go ahead, and then I'll turn to Councillor Butler.
Sure, Your Worship. Just to that point, thank you for the suggestion. We'll follow up to see if potentially, CN can provide some access, some alternate access. So if we have utility construction going on in the front, maybe access to the rear of the property for the on-site development, and in coordination with CN. Appreciate the suggestion. We'll follow up to see if we can. I'd just also say, with respect to CN, they do have design guidelines and recommendations, which would be taken into account when we start to do the on-site development of the, essentially of the building. They do have recommendations and requirements that we're well aware of that would be incorporated into that construction project. The other thing that I was going to say, for council's information, in terms of coordination that needs to happen. First off, obviously we have to coordinate the construction of the building with the water line and the sewer line to the building. That's the major coordination. But internally within MOJ administration, we need to ensure if any of these projects are going ahead that we're coordinating our internal processes as well. We need to ensure that operations, utilities are well aware that we're interacting with parks, and there is the financial aspect as well. As Mr. Timmons identified, there will be capital required, which will obviously be borrowing, both on the development of the utilities, but also on the vertical structure, the apartment building as well. And so there is going to need to be some internal coordination to ensure that we prepare borrowing bylaws with enough lead time to hit the times where we would need to make a draw on those. So just to highlight that there are coordination issues with external parties, coordination issues between the two projects, and then finally internal coordination that we also have to manage as well, just so that council is fully aware of the scope of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Kiven. Councillor Butler.
Thanks very much. And thanks, Chris, very much for this information. Very helpful. I have a couple of questions. The first is just relative to the physical layout of lines and relative to incremental costs of proceeding in a phased manner rather than for the whole project. I think that what you showed us, the diagram you showed us, considers several, maybe 3 tie-ins, creating essentially 3 loops to the town system. I'm wondering if those loops, all 3 of those tie-ins are necessary if we were to proceed with servicing all 3 packages. Is it best practice to have those 3 tie-ins, or if we went with the whole project, would it just be one large loop and saving some incremental cost in those tie-ins?
It's a really good question, and part of this feasibility study is determining what ultimately has to be done for bringing water across from the other side of Connaught. There's the engineer that's working on this right now said there is potentially an opportunity to limit to remove one of those crossings across Connaught, just if there's the hydraulic network analysis data that there is there to support it. Otherwise, I think what he was showing was just what a safe best practice, given the lack of information that he had at the time of putting this sketch together. So if the hydraulic network analysis is good, then there might be an opportunity to limit one of those crossings for water. So, yeah.
Go ahead, Councillor Butler.
Great. Thank you very much. That's kind of the answer I expected to hear. So in a sense, it's the worst case, but probable case scenario that you've shown. So my other question is around what Mayor Ireland was earlier discussing. I just scribbled down the numbers you shared with us. If we're looking at just under 1.6, say, for servicing GC alone, it's worth pointing out that the interest of JCHC is really in parcels GC, but also parcel GB. It's worth pointing out that parcel GB has been placed on the market for market housing, and that was done at the request of an earlier council, which was then actually at the request of JCHC. So just in terms of making the space as ready as possible for future development, and also having very clear costs in mind as to the cost of servicing GB as well. So you said it would be about 1.757 for GC and then about another $1.8 million for the full build out. Can I infer from that that the sort of upcharge for servicing GB in addition to GC might be about half of that 1.8 or another $800,000, which is simple math, or does it not really work out that way? So that if we decided to service GB, GC and GB together, it might be something like 2.4 million, or am I stretching what you've been able to determine from this
Maybe,
study?
yeah, Your Worship, if I can respond, Chris may have more detail. Administration will bring a greater level of detail when we bring forward a recommendation to Council Committee of the Whole. But having said that, Councillor Butler, the incremental cost is not the only cost. I guess, you know, the GB parcel would require services to pass GC, in order to get them there. And so it is reasonable to say that their cost is not only the incremental cost above and beyond what it costs to serve GC. It may be reasonable, and you know, council has some choice in this. It may be reasonable to assign them some portion of the cost of getting the services out all the way to their parcel, if that makes sense. And again, I don't have that level of detail. We haven't broken it apart for this presentation today. But that is the kind of consideration that council will be able to make when we think about how we might assign any relevant cost to the GB parcel. You know, how much of that is the public good, and might council wish to incorporate sort of in the overall municipal contribution towards those projects, and how much might council want to say would be, for lack of a better term, a cost of doing business that would be appropriate for the developers, any future developers of GB. And that is a question I think the council will get a chance to express an opinion on.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Councillor Butler, go ahead.
Great, that's perfect answer. So we'll be able to look in a little more detail as we move down the road and be able to consider how we might assign costs to the two parcels and leave any potential, put any potential developers of GB in a position of knowing what their servicing costs might be in their process of allocating development costs to that property. Good, thanks very much. That's good information.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to either Mr. Timmins or this might be appropriate for Mr. Greathead. I'm just wondering, with the discussion on incremental costs, if there was any contemplation on the incremental costs of municipal sidewalks, if that's in the plan, you know, post resurfacing of the implementation of said underground works.
Go ahead, Mr. Greathead, if you wish to answer.
Your Worship, to speak to that question, yes, that's part of the design plan as we're going forward with this. So we've left it open right now to whether it's a curb and sidewalk like a monolithic pour, or whether we're going to be putting in a boulevard sidewalk. So those options are there. Right now, it's just at the high level design costing stage right now. But
thank
yes.
you, Mr. Greathead. Mr. Timmins, I saw your hand up as well.
Yeah, I think Mr. Greathead took the words right out of my mouth. We are definitely considering costs for the construction of a sidewalk along there in this analysis. So really, I mean, just to back this up, as part of the work that we've done with the JCHC for the on-site stuff, this preliminary design brief, as we're calling it, as part of the feasibility study, really serves two purposes. It's to give council and the municipality the ability to see what needs to be done, and provide full scope and cost to those at a somewhat high level, but also providing some direction to the actual design builders who are waiting in the wings to do the work on site, right? So without knowledge of how to, where those public utilities are coming into the site, it's, there's a lot of uncertainty for the design builder in their design of the actual housing development itself. So yeah, and really we're just trying to take a high level here, but at the end of the day, yes, sidewalks and the boulevard would all be part of this new municipal servicing work.
Councillor Demota, go ahead.
Well, I believe in the past, in our overall capital plan that we did have as part of the rejuvenation of that area, the section from the Petro-Can parking lot to the intersection at Hazel to redo or put in a municipal sidewalk there. So I believe that even with a phased approach that we might see some cost savings if we were going to tackle all this at one time. That's just an assumption of mine, and I'm not sure what the amount might be, but even though minimal, there is a savings to the community.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Councillor Janot, is your hand up there? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. My question was on that sidewalk linking the corner of Hazel and Connaught with the Petro-Canada. Are we including it in here? Hopefully we are. This question is for Mr. Greathead.
Your worship, to get back to that question, everything that we're going to be installing, it'll have to be resurfaced, and the overall intent is for installing sidewalks and completing the walkability as we're going through. As we're discussing this project, I think it's important to acknowledge the incredibly tight timelines. Like this project is it's absolutely doable, but it's going to take an awful lot of coordination. There's going to have to be, we're going to have to be very flexible on how we go about this. I see that we're going to have to be digging up Connaught and Hazel direct berry right across. So the road repairs and such as that, that's something that we're all going to have to be really planning on and making sure that we get our contractor coordination and to be able to make this project successful. So there is an awful lot. But right now, the feasibility study that Mr. Timmons and Colliers is working on should give us some definite answers and some options as we guide this project through.
Thank you, Mr. Greathead. Councillor Butler, and then Councillor Wilson.
Sorry, one quick follow-up. You may have mentioned it, but I don't remember. Does this plan consider stormwater sewer as well? I don't think there's stormwater along that stretch. Or is it only sanitary and water lines?
This design would consider the drainage, like surface drainage and stormwater management. So, and currently, and obviously there's still a bit of work left to do, but it's looking like it all can be managed on site with a low impact development and absorbed within the site footprint itself. So because before getting into this, storm was actually looking like one of the most significant challenges of getting in, just with the existing infrastructure that's under the median in Connaught being at a higher elevation than the existing parcels. So it's looking promising that we might be able to get away with some low impact development for managing surface drainage.
Great, thank you very much.
Councillor Wilson.
So a couple things. I would support moving ahead with the feasibility study, rather whether we get the funding for the Rapid Housing Initiative funding or not. I think it's prudent that we service these lots if we have any thought of any developer coming to the table. So I think I definitely am support of moving forward with this. My question actually also was, I think the timeline for if we find out whether we're successful or not, is that end of February? So a couple weeks, we're kind of in the know.
That's what I understand, yes. It was supposed to be January, but apparently it was quite oversubscribed. So I think the CMHC is flipping through quite a few proposals right now. But
Okay.
I believe the Jasper submission was well positioned, and the need is obviously there. So.
And then, of course, the 12 months starts with what kind of milestone? I guess my next question.
Yes, my understanding is the 12 months starts from the signing of a funding agreement. So if we're notified by the end of February that the JCHC is successful in their application, there's going to be a little bit of time, some back and forth time. I'm estimating a few weeks to get the funding agreement signed. And once that agreement is signed and executed, that's when I believe the 12 months starts. So, we still have the procurement phase, the design build competition to go through to determine who the ultimate builder will be. And then there's also the refining of the design. So we could be looking at a shortened construction, but I mean, that's everyone across Canada is in the same position, right? And I think we're already well positioned for the JCHC in the work that's already been done there to proceed. So.
Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. You're good? All right, I see, Councillor Demota.
Oh, just anecdotally, I know that when we were approaching the back half of this term, we had a strat plan meeting, and Councillor Wilson's desire was to have at least a shovel in the ground by the end of our term for that particular project. So we're getting closer to that. Fingers crossed for you. You got a cheerleader here for sure.
Thank you.
Right.
No, this is really good news.
I will turn to Mr. Given for concluding remarks, but before I do that, there has been discussion here about cooperation and coordination moving forward, but I want to recognize all of that has occurred up to this point. I want to thank Colliers and you, Mr. Timmins, for your work coordinating not just with the Jasper Community Housing Corporation, and I thank Councillor Butler for his input on that. It's been stellar, but also there has been incredible coordination, I think, to this stage already with Parks Canada. And there are a lot of people that we can thank for getting this project to the stage where we've been able to make the application for the Rapid Initiative funding. So I want to take this opportunity to thank you and all of those who have been involved. And it's a wonderful opportunity, I think, Mr. Given, for bringing it forward to let the public know where we stand. And this is an exciting opportunity for our community. And we are really close. And it's going to be a push, and there will be challenges for sure. But I really commend all of you for getting us to this stage. So thank you. And Mr. Given, I will allow you to close out the presentation.
Sure. Thanks, Your Worship. There's one thing I wanted to share with Council just in terms of where we are in the process. And as you said, Your Worship, certainly important for the community to understand that if we're to make progress on this important community goal, and if we receive the grant, and there are a number of ifs, but if we are to make progress, it will have to happen very, very quickly. And so I think the intent of the presentation today was to ensure Council was informed, but also to make sure the community is informed so that if and when we get to the point where we can start to take some shovels onto site, as Councillor Wilson, had a goal of, that the public is not surprised. I know that the community of Jasper appreciates our natural environment, and hopefully Council has a good sense of the due diligence that's going into this project. We would hope that you'd pass that on to the community so they're first off aware that they may see activity on that site. And we know that a significant change like this, will bring questions. Hopefully everybody can remain focused on the ultimate goal of delivering new affordable housing units into the community, and that we can sort of manage some of those challenges that might come along. Just for Council's information, I wanted to highlight, if I can, and I'm going to share screen. We'll see if I'm as good as Mr. Timmins in doing that. And this was the one that I'm looking for, as long as I don't end up causing you I will, excuse me. There is one file that I wanted to share just to share with council approximately where we are. And council, can you see this image that shows approximate current state? Somebody can give me a nod there.
It's on my screen.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes, I see.
So with any design, as you narrow down and ultimately get to construction, you get a more and more accurate sort of reflection of what the cost will be. Just to set council's expectation, I'd suggest that we're sort of somewhere on the edge of that concept or preliminary design level of detail. Ultimately, we'll have to go to market with a tender or request for proposals for construction, and we would move along this curve where the accuracy of the estimate would become in greater focus. But just so that, in fairness to Mr. Timmins, if and when we get to a detailed recommendation to council of specific costs, we're moving along that funnel, as it were, to more and more greater level of detail. And at this stage, we need to keep in mind that it is still a fairly high order cost estimate and not a detailed construction cost estimate, as we'll get to later on. But I just wanted to set council and the community's expectation. You heard some numbers today, and we should recognize that those numbers are only at the feasibility stage or the sort of preliminary design stage. We are moving further and further along that line, but we're not quite there to the end of it, which would be a construction where we'll know the ultimate cost. And that's all I wanted to say to conclude that. Thanks very much, Chris, for being here to present today. Council, the information that you saw today will form the basis of administration's recommendation, and we'll have some discussion about how far council wishes to extend services and what is an appropriate share of costs between the potential projects.
Thank you, Mr. Given and Mr. Timmins. Before you leave, I see that Councillor Butler has a concluding word yet, so I will allow that.
Well, thanks very much. And it was not my intention to make this a concluding remark, but it seems to have gone that way. But because of the direction this conversation went, I want to make another important point relative to what Councillor Wilson had mentioned earlier about the advisability of doing this in-ground service now, whether or not we're successful with the RHI grant. And that is to point out that the JCHC was already working on a model for affordable housing on parcel GC that we usually refer to as the co-investment model. It's a different governance and financial model to create some affordable housing. And because of the RHI opportunity for that large grant, we sort of pivoted and moved toward that. But it's really important that the community understand that if we are not successful with the RHI grant, the JCHC still intends to do its best to move forward with that co-investment model that involved creating housing by investment from members within the business sector of the community. So it's really important to understand that if we were to make this infrastructure investment and not be successful with the RHI grant, we still expect to need these services in the ground within the next, I would say at most 24 months. Our intent is, and expectation is, to be able to move forward with the co-investment model. If this one doesn't go, if the RHA doesn't go ahead, if the RHI does go ahead, we're still prepared to move forward with the co-investment model if it seems that there's enough community demand for that much housing. Thanks for letting me slip that in there. And Mr. Timmins and Mr. Greathead and Mr. Given, thanks very much for all your support in this. I know you've been working really hard on getting this in front of council as quickly as you have.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Go ahead, Mr. Timmins.
No, I was going to say thank you, everyone. It has been a pleasure to present to you guys today, to all of you today, and hope to see you soon. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
All right. That concludes agenda item 4.1. 4.2 is a presentation regarding the water treatment plant RFP process. And again, I will turn to you, Mr. Given, to introduce that.
Great. Thanks very much, Your Worship. Yes, Council, it's all water all day today. 4.2 is another ongoing process that was started some time ago, as Council, I believe, is well aware. The operations of the wastewater treatment plant have been transitioned over the last couple of years. We're currently with an interim service provider in the form of EPCOR, and the municipality has been engaged in a process of seeking a long-term partnership for operations of the wastewater treatment plant. We've been assisted in what is really a relatively complex and significant purchasing process. And David Levasseur from the Other Side Advisory Group has been assisting Mr. Greathead and his team in developing this RFP, taking it out to market, and really assisting the municipality of Jasper in ensuring that we have a rigorous process for this very fundamental community service in terms of wastewater treatment. So Dave is here to provide an overview of that process for council's information. We will be coming to council in the future with a recommendation for awarding the RFP to a proponent, but Dave will explain how we arrived where we are today, where we are in the process, and what council can expect to see coming forward. So I'll turn it over to Dave.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for the opportunity to allow me to speak with you all this morning. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly. There was a PowerPoint presentation that was provided, and I'm not sure if council received that, but regardless, I'm going to attempt to share my screen here today. If I could just ask that I get a nod once it's up, that would be great. Can everybody see that at this point?
I'm going to assume so. Thank you.
Okay. So with that, I'll just jump right in. So I'm just going to move on to the next notice. So just as a form of notice, as you work through, you'll see capitalized terms that are listed within the presentation that aren't defined. Wherever you see that, it's just because we're pulling definitions right out of the RFP itself. Also, as you'll move through, you'll notice that we're not sharing actual results of our evaluation process. Please note that that's intentional, and obviously we're just doing that to maintain the integrity of the process. Just a quick note on who the other side is. I'm not going to read through this whole thing. Really, the key takeaway here is that we're a group of individuals who've worked in large corporate, municipal, and small business settings. Our background and our experience really just provides us with the opportunity of developing solutions and deliverables that work for the entire business, because we've had the experience of playing in various facets that our team has. In terms of what we do, we're obviously heavily involved with water utility service renewals, and obviously various aspects of the utility process itself. So with that, I'm just going to jump into how the RFP process overview is structured today. 4 components we want to touch on today: engagement, development of the RFP itself, the proponent evaluation, and then obviously just a general takeaway on what the council approval looks like. When it comes to engagement, obviously we're looking at needs assessment and just the existing lay of the land, right? The status of that is actually complete. We performed that shortly after our arrival in October. Next point of that was actually developing the RFP itself with the appropriate components and considerations, which we'll get into in some detail here shortly. And then obviously the evaluation framework on how we structured it. So jumping into that, first of all, as I mentioned, October 28th is when the other side started its services. And really when it comes down to understanding what Jasper's needs were, the engagement piece, first of all, it was, identifying what the scope and the target level of service were. As mentioned, there's an existing incumbent service provider. So there is a level of service that is already being delivered to Jasper, and obviously understanding what that was and having a tangible understanding of where those services need to be after the RFP was done was an important consideration. From there, we just needed to generate general objectives and timelines that worked for the municipality. And obviously, we wanted to take inventory of what information and what work had already been done to be able to support the process and ensure that we were successful. The last takeaway piece in terms of contract review was obviously just understanding that there's a certain amount of requirements, or there's a certain protocol that's already in place, given the contract that the municipality already had with its EPCOR, the incumbent service provider. So we just need to make sure that we were honoring that, and we weren't tripping up on any aspects or requirements as listed within the contract. Moving on to the next piece, which is the RFP development itself. So you have to appreciate we've tried to distill a 165-page document down into one slide here. So I appreciate that it probably doesn't go into as many details as you want. Obviously, I'd highly encourage that you review the RFP. It went out on IPC on December 3rd, and it provides a very fulsome review of all of this information. But for the purposes of today, wanted to get into the 5 major components, which are, this first of all, confirming the scope of work. So as mentioned, we have, very targeted service agreement with EPCOR in place before we started this. So the language and the legal requirements and everything else were fairly well defined within that document, which is an important part of the RFP when you go to the tender process. The other aspect here is that we wanted to understand, not only what Jasper was receiving currently, but also wanted to adapt and change it for any directions that it wanted to go, given the term of the horizon that we were looking at. So from there, we sat down with administration, and John and the team had a very targeted direction on what dates they wanted to hit and when they wanted to hit those dates as far as project milestones. And really where our role was there is just making sure that those dates were developed in consideration of the market's ability to be able to turn around an effective and targeted proposal for the municipality of Jasper, which I think we achieved quite well. Moving into the standard services agreement, this was a discussion and a decision made quite early. We wanted to make sure that the actual scope and the requirements of the RFP were also supported by and articulated by a standard services agreement that got into the legalities and the language itself that supported the scope. The reason why I find this to be important in aspect and inclusion within the RFP is that when it gets to the negotiation piece, given the dollars that we're talking about and given the process and the complexity of the contract structuring, by having it out front, what it allows proponents to do is just get a really tangible understanding of what they're bidding around. And what that does is that to the extent that successful proponent is identified in the back end, you can then use that document in the standard service agreement really just to accelerate the contracting process. So that was included. Next part here is that we wanted to provide some background and direction on really some of where the qualitative structuring of the proposals were. And by doing that, it basically allows proponents to target their times. The mechanism we used to do that were just general scoring components, which we'll get into here in more detail shortly. And again, it just allowed the proponents to be able to understand what objectives we were seeking out generally and where they should be focusing their time in terms of crafting their responses. And then finally, of course, we had legal considerations given the nature of the procurement process. We wanted to make sure we included the right privilege statements and the right general limitations around liability, et cetera, within the document. And therefore, the RFP itself went to legal counsel on Jasper's side of things, just for lack of a better term, a pat on the head to make sure that we had included all the appropriate language and consideration in ways to protect the municipality as it went through this process. So this next slide is a bit of a, I waffled on whether or not including it. The reason why it was included here is this is just a direct excerpt taken right from the actual RFP document. And what it does is it goes through and lists all of the milestones as it relates to the RFP process. So, working through this quickly, obviously the RFP was issued on December 3rd, as mentioned. We had proponents come in and do a mandatory site meeting. So they came and actually had eyes and walked the site to understand exactly what our assets were. Obviously, an important part to developing that proposal and their due diligence process is obviously understanding what we're asking them to operate. Obviously, they had an opportunity to ask questions, which the municipality then answered within a timely basis. And then finally, the actual proposals were required from proponents by January 19th of this year. So from there, obviously, you're seeing some dates and some timelines that haven't transpired yet, and that was expected, and we're working through that now, which relates to that ongoing process comment that I made previously. So moving into the evaluation portion of this, really what it comes down to is making sure that administration has a roadmap to understanding how it's going to work through the evaluation process. And there's some important components which I've kind of distilled that roadmap down into, and those relate to basically an evaluation matrix, making sure that we have the appropriate parties at the selection committee table, and then obviously structuring how we are going to review all of the proposals that come through. And then to the extent, to the state that it was applicable, obviously, how do we look at preferred proponents to be able to understand that final potential successful proponent when we go through. So working through that process with administration, it's all documented within an evaluation process narrative that was adopted and confirmed by the entire selection committee team. And we're going to work through some of these components here in greater detail. So coming back to the evaluation matrix, I spoke to the general components that helped target proponents' deliveries of their proposals. The three major components that we looked at were environmental stewardship, the technical aspect, and obviously the price aspect, which is always important. Now, keep in mind, administration and other side worked to develop specific selection criteria and weightings that were comprised within each one of those general components listed in front of you. And really, it just provides that framework to be able to weight and score all proponents and all proposals in the exact same manner, so that you can maintain consistency through the process. Keep in mind, there's an actual tangible evaluation matrix, which is the makeup of all of those selection criteria and weightings. And those were delivered, and everybody had their own evaluation matrix. Every member of the selection committee had their own copy of that evaluation matrix. Next step was obviously a selection committee, and I'm not going to beat this one up too much. Really, the members of the selection criteria include the CAO, Director of Operations, the Utilities Manager, the Buildings and Asset Manager, and obviously ourselves as project advisors. And really the key takeaway I want for council here is just to know that the differences on the committee and the wide range of experience and knowledge base and backgrounds are actually what bolsters the selection criteria. Obviously, if everybody was thinking down the same line of thought in terms of background and experience, you'd get a very biased, one-sided response and evaluation process. In my opinion, and the way this was structured, I think the CEO did a great job in terms of making sure the right skill and the right mix of skill sets are at the table here. Obviously, in the context of a larger understanding for the actual assets themselves. Working through to the next point, so the evaluation process. So services proposals were due on January 19th, and we received a lot of them, which is great. First of all, what the team did is that we did a preliminary review just to make sure that the services proposals submitted by proponents, by all proponents, just check the boxes on the prescribed requirements of the RFP. That was the first step. From there, as mentioned, every selection committee member went away with their own evaluation metrics and read from start to finish each one of the services proposals from each component and scored them as they went through and evaluated that. That produced a general scoring for each selection committee member, which is then ultimately included within a consolidated evaluation result summary, which other side combines with base price proposal. Now, we wanted to make sure that we didn't want pricing information as part of, we'll call it a larger qualitative assessment within the evaluation metrics. And therefore, what we did here is we just had the base price proposal sealed and separated from selection committee members' initial review. Those were ultimately added on the back end with the evaluation, the consolidated evaluation results, which really provides a really refined look at what the consolidated scoring results were for all proponents. So once we had that, the selection committee met remotely just to discuss whether or not there were preferred proponents in the groupings that we received. And obviously we were able to identify multiple preferred proponents that were asked to move on to the next stage of the process by doing so. And then really, how did the evaluation process change, right, when we get to the preferred proponent stage? And really, it comes back to exactly what was prescribed within the RFP. So the week of February 1st, we had preferred proponents come back and deliver a brief presentation as prescribed within the RFP. And really, the high level here was just to touch on and to dig into some additional operation considerations, questions that were still outstanding from the selection committee members. And we did that. And I must say, speaking on behalf of the selection committee, I think the presentations were really well received and they were really well done and super professional. And so at that point in time, once those were delivered, the selection committee was tasked with looking at the evaluation criteria specifically for the preferred proponents. And they were just asked to incorporate any new information that was incorporated and delivered by that presentation into their scoring results. And so with the idea here is that with the new evaluation metrics developed for specific preferred proponents, those were consolidated within an indicative successful proponent summary, which provided a high level ranking as to where everyone scored. And the selection committee was tasked just to meet remotely and determine if any preferred proponents were selected as a potential successful proponent. And moving into the back end of the process, as Mr. Gibbons pointed out previously, this was just intended to gauge and inform council regarding the RFP process and just provide some insights on how it was structured generally, and really just provide council with a platform to inventory and address any outstanding concerns that they may have on their end. And as just one last takeaway, the general process update, the results that we've seen thus far is obviously are great, and there's been really strong interest from the market. And the reason why that helps is that obviously it just translates into multiple high quality options for the town of Jasper to address the concerns and the services as outlined within the RFP. So a couple of key dates here as a takeaway. Administration has communicated that they'll be coming back to council with a final recommendation on February 23rd, and they'd be looking to, potentially ratify that services agreement with a successful proponent sometime in mid-May 2021. So with that, obviously happy to take any questions that I can share with you at this point in time. And I'll open the floor, and I'll just mute myself for now until I'm asked to respond.
Thank you very much for that presentation and condensing a 165-page RFP into those few slides. That's impressive work in itself. So thank you for that. Councillors, questions for Dave, our presenter? I see nothing. Suggesting one of two alternatives, I suppose. Time for it to sink in is one, and it's highly technical. I appreciate the work that you've done on this, Dave, and the other side has done on this, and I think it's really telling that the reaction of council is as it is. It is difficult sometimes to understand all that is going on in our absence, and our staff, and particularly those on this selection committee, have obviously done a tremendous amount of work reviewing, as you said, there are numerous proposals that came in. They're going to be highly technical and lengthy, and the time that it has taken to move through those and have a preferred set of proponents that you have now evaluated and interviewed. We appreciate, because we've been through a similar process, but we had no 165-page RFP to deal with. So the work that was on behind the scenes is staggering. It is revealing to council, but it's particularly revealing to the public. So I really appreciate the presentation to give us just a bit of a sense of what goes on behind the scenes. And I thank you, and I thank Mr. Given and all of our staff who have contributed so many hours to this process. Go ahead, Dave.
Just as one last takeaway, I just want to communicate that it's been an absolute pleasure working with the team, especially given Mr. Given's recent start. I think he was able to come up the curve very quickly on this, and obviously by supporting and having a team from John and Vidal and Gord, it's been an absolute pleasure working with him. And I think you're seeing that in the results. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you and the team today.
Yeah, thank you. It appears to be very thorough, well-researched, and staff has done a wonderful job. We're looking forward then to a recommendation at next week's committee of the whole meeting, I take it. So fantastic progress since we started in late October, including a transition in the role of interim CAO to CAO. But of course, Mr. Greathead has been involved throughout it all. So thank you. Mr. Given, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Your Worship. Just to reiterate and really put a point on it, John, Vidal, and Gordon have done a fantastic job. My ease of ability to slip in is really because of the process that they had worked through with Dave, and that's what made it easy to come in. They continue to do a great job. As you said, this is the sort of technical end of it. Council will see the administrative recommendation next week at Committee of the Whole. The intent there being that Council would have enough information to recommend forward to Council, that we enter into negotiations with a successful proponent, and then ultimately, subject to the conclusion of those successful negotiations, you'll see a recommendation to enter into a contract for operations. That will be coming, I think, as Dave sort of highlighted, towards May. But Council's aware, and you will see a little bit of the pointy end of this recommendation next week.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. And again, thank you, Dave. We do appreciate the report, and despite the lack of questions, I think I can speak for council to say thank you very much for that presentation. It really is helpful for us and for the community. So thank you for that. All right, Mr. Given, we can move to agenda item 4.3, the Emergency Coordination Center update. And again, I'm not sure whether you will be presenting that. I don't see Mr. Van Tighem on my screen, so I presume that that falls to you.
Yes, Your Worship. Again, a brief update for Council as the ECC continues to meet on a weekly basis to ensure that we're keeping pace with what's going on locally, provincially, and internationally. As of this morning, I had a look. You'll see that the active case count in Jasper is now up to 6. We had been at 3, 4, kind of in that range. So I think it is a reminder that we all need to continue to be vigilant, particularly recognizing that we're moving into the first phase of reopening. I think I heard a few people talking about how startling it was to see patrons in restaurants as you drove by, because I think we've become so accustomed to seeing those spaces vacant that it could be a little bit startling. But that should be a good reminder to all of us that we need to ensure that we're entering this new phase of reopening with renewed vigilance about our own personal behaviors, that we're masking and not stretching the bounds of what the province has allowed. The ECC is watching and listening to what's going on with respect to provincial reports on variants, which are those international variants, which are found to be more contagious, easier to spread. The ECC is also watching what's happening with vaccines. I think some of the latest news reports have been that after getting a little off track in terms of production, some of the major producers have been able to ramp up again, maybe a little bit sooner than expected. Hopefully that will mean good news for our community over time. And then just finally, that reminder of vigilance. I think, as Mr. Van Tighem would say, make sure you wash your hands, remain physically separated, mask up, and ensure that as we go into this transition of reopening as directed by the province, that we all do ensure that we're respecting what by now I think everybody knows to be best practices in terms of public health and hygiene. And hopefully we can maintain these very low, relatively low case numbers going forward. That's the only update for today. We'll be happy to present another brief update again next week.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. We can move then to agenda item 5. Is there any business arising from, I'm sorry, Councillor Journeau?
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. My question is not on the current pandemic, but it's to do with emergency procedures and emergency coordination. As I review and listen and read about the Nova Scotia massacre that occurred last April, there seemed to be a really lack of communication and coordination and making the decision to send out an Amber Alert, which now looking back would have saved a lot of lives. And the scenario that was set up there is very similar to what we have here. They have 3 parties. So the 3 parties for us would be Parks Canada, the municipality, and the province of Alberta. And the province, in their case, and I assume it's the same here, is responsible for issuing the Amber Alert. But it has to come from a source. And the RCMP were using a form of Twitter to keep people informed. They were bringing people in to prepare an Amber Alert advisory warning, but they didn't seem to keep up. They were rewriting and redoing the wording of it because the information was coming on the Twitter side that was different. And it's just basically, when you look back at it, that it's easy to beat 2020, but it's really a bungling of a lack of information, but also a lack of just making the call. Everybody's just kind of waiting for the other guy, because they had 3 parties. They have the province, the RCMP, and local police agencies. So they were all kind of the same way. And I'm wondering, I mean, there's a lot of lessons to be learned there, and there's going to be lots coming out, but I'm wondering if here in Alberta, do we have, and especially here in Jasper, because we have 3 parties, do we have those procedures in place so that somebody can make the big call, which is the Amber Alert or blocking roads, those kind of things? Do we have that in place, or are we still under study, or do we review this regularly? Thank you.
Mr. Given, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, Your Worship, I can speak to that in general terms. First, I would say that I'm really encouraged by the level of coordination that I see at the ECC. I think one of the small number of benefits we might be able to identify from the pandemic, I think it really has provided an opportunity for municipalities and their related and adjacent agencies to work more closely together on a regular basis. So here in Jasper, the practice has been EMS, RCMP, Municipality of Jasper staff, weekly meeting together. And so there is an increased level of coordination. That's on top of past practice of regular tabletop exercises in terms of disaster planning. And so I think that going forward, as we think about Mr. Van Teegam's role and the position that he will be leaving, I think that emergency services coordination across parties will be an important part of that role going forward. As you know, I think over the last couple of decades have really understood that large multi-agency events are really kind of the name of the game these days, whether we're talking wildfires, Amber Alerts, or pandemics. There is no single agency that is responsible for all parts of a disaster or emergency. And that's why that emergency services coordination becomes really important. To Councillor Journeau's point about Amber Alert, I would have to confirm this, but I believe that the ultimate authority on Amber Alerts would be the RCMP or the province of Alberta. I don't believe that that's within our jurisdiction to make a call on that. So Councillor Journeau, I would say that specifically on that narrow scope of an Amber Alert, that authority would fall to the RCMP. It certainly would not be within the municipal scope. We would want to ensure that we're well informed and in close collaboration with the responsible authorities there. And then finally, you know, I think the interesting thing about Jasper, which Council is well aware of, is the challenge of calling a state of local emergency. Ultimately, that authority in Jasper lies with the superintendent of the national park. I'm aware that in Banff, they have been able to essentially get that authority delegated to the municipality. Here, there is, I think, an understanding that the superintendent would act on the advice of council, but it might be something that council wishes to pursue to see if we could get essentially a delegation of that authority as has happened in Banff. And that might be an issue for discussion at a future council or committee meeting. But we certainly are working in close collaboration with our partners in a multi-agency sort of setting, Councillor Jeanneau.
Thank you for that. I will return then to agenda item 5, business arising. Is there any business arising from the minutes of the regular meeting of February 2nd? If not, there are no department reports scheduled, and I take it there is nothing to add, Mr. Given. There are no information reports and no bylaws for consideration. So that disposes with agenda items 6, 7, and 8. And agenda item 9, we have one request for decision on the outdoor skating surface policy. And Mr. Given, I will turn that to you for a presentation or delegation to another staff member if you choose.
Sure, Your Worship. Really very little to be said. Council saw this last week at Council Committee of the Whole. I think you're well aware of the policy. We did make some of those adjustments as noted at the committee meeting. You'll see that we have identified the Director of Operations as the responsible party for ultimately making the call. I think was previously left to supervisor, but the supervisor is identified ultimately as the Director of Operations or designate. And so we have identified a responsible party. And then there was also some additional sort of typo and formatting that was identified by Mayor Ireland. And so I believe we've made those adjustments. It's here in its final form for Council's ultimate approval.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Let's commence, if we can, with a motion, and I will then open it to debate as necessary. Councillor McGrath.
I'd happily make that motion, Mayor Ireland.
Thank you. So I have a motion from Councillor McGrath that council approve the outdoor skating service policy as presented. Is there any debate on the motion? If not, vote Councillor Butler.
Thank you very much. I only want to draw attention to the primary policy statement, which commits the municipality, what I would understand to be on an ongoing basis, to providing temporary outdoor ice skating surfaces on municipal property, where I understood that we had committed to provide it for this season in an exploratory, in the spirit of exploration. Of course, any policy can be rescinded or changed, but that is quite a broad statement, probably not broad enough to motivate me to vote against it. But I'm just wondering, and I apologize at not having been here for the committee of whole meeting, whether that is in fact the intent of the majority of council. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Councillor Butler. Councillor McGrath.
The policy statement as it reads is something that I get excited about. It's really engaging to know that there's an ice surface in front of the library, and I would gladly support that statement, knowing that there is possibility of having ice skating surfaces on a more regular basis in the community of Jasper. But as you stated, Councillor Butler, it could be rescinded at any point in time if another council or if administration deemed that it wasn't working in our town. But I think it's exciting to consider this on a more regular basis.
Thank you for that. I too express some views, and not sufficient to have me vote against this policy, but at some point, I think this should be rolled into a larger scope policy about outdoor recreation and move beyond just winter ice services. And so I recognize the point that you are making, Councillor Butler, and I don't disagree, but I personally do think that this particular policy will, in any event, I hope, have a relatively short life and then be combined with something broader. I also note that it is curious, the word affordable and how that could be interpreted. And it could mean affordable for the municipality, which I think could change the tenor somewhat, not simply affordable for users. So it's a little inexact, and I'm happy with that. Any other debate? Councillor Junot?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm glad you made in your comments outdoor ice surfaces, because I too would support more than one. And I think this is a great start, and I don't think we should be putting any negative waters on this at all. It should be all positive. Winters are long. It's Canada. It's outdoors. And this is long overdue. And there's no doubt that we should be looking forward to every way possible to ensure that even if there's some deficiencies in this surface or in the administration pressure surface, that we should not exclude the possibility of encouraging volunteer groups, private societies to develop these and work with this. It's Canada. We need to be skating. I realize we have skiing here, but not every kid in this town can afford the expensive sport of skiing, but they can afford a skating surface. Outdoor shinny hockey, it's not expensive, and it's a special welcome to new Canadians that don't participate for the most part in team sports because they just can't afford it, but they can certainly afford an outdoor surface. So to my opinion, we should have certainly more than one, and it should all be small surfaces so the ease of maintenance and keep it for the little guys. Thank you.
Councillor Wilson, and then Councillor Demota.
Just as I was driving by the other day, it might be a little bit more an operations item, but I thought that some picnic tables a little closer by for putting on skates, and then a couple shovels so people can clear the snow or the ice that gets chopped up just to maximize the enjoyability, but great job. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Demota?
Well, you know what, and I'm supporting this, and I thank you. I thank Councillor McGrath for putting this forward, and you know, I'm glad that we're not always taking like a binary approach to decision making. We need to add some or leave some room for nuance, and this is like a good first step, at least to get you know, build towards something a little bit more broad, and maybe in the future work with our other agencies like you know, Tourism Jasper to maybe develop something for visitors, and then keep expanding areas in our community for community members, so that everyone that lives here and visits can have an opportunity to do something other than, you know, go skiing or the normal attraction. So I think it does add some vibrancy to the community. We've seen it in other communities, and it's a great thing for people to get outdoors and be physically active. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no other hands, so I will call the question. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. So thank you for that. That takes us to agenda item 10. Correspondence from our MP, Mr. Soroka, regarding support for a suicide prevention hotline 988. Councillor, sorry, Mr. Given.
Your Worship, just to provide a small amount of context why this is here, it was addressed to Council. Looks as though it is one likely that MP Soroka sent to a number of communities, but given that it is addressed to the elected officials, and that it would be up to Council to choose whether or not they wish to provide a letter of support, I felt that it was appropriate for it to come here for Council consideration. If Council wished to provide a letter of support, you could do that by resolution, and administration would assist by doing up a draft for the mayor's signature and consideration, again, if that's the direction Council wished to go. But it's here. I'd suggest either an action of receiving the letter for information, which would mean, you know, we've seen this request and we're choosing not necessarily to act on it right now, or you know, a motion you know, giving some other direction to administration.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Comments from councillors? Councillor Journeau?
Yes, I would support this because I think that eventually we should be looking at one number similar to a 911 for this type of stuff. I just watched a program coming out of Calgary in view of the number of people there who died from opioid, and they mentioned a list of 5 numbers for which people to call for help. They're all, you know, 8-digit numbers, and of course, the people who are down at that point in life, sorry, they don't have the opportunity to compose a 10-digit number. I'm very sorry. So eventually, I hope that this would lead to a national one number, so that those people who are in the difficult times of their life can quickly get assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Journeau. Councillor Demota?
I'm in favor of supporting this, and I think that the timing couldn't be more appropriate. And I think people should move on this, and I think that the more support this can garner, the better, and everything that Councillor Journeau stated.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath.
Thank you, Mayor Ireland. I agree with what's been said by other councillors thus far. I think that anything that we can do to add more supports and more consistency of supports in the mental health realm is certainly necessary, especially during these times. There was something in Alberta, and I don't remember exactly what it was. Maybe it was a 3-digit number that you could call for mental health, and the communities had to buy into it, and Jasper was one of the communities that didn't, but all it seemed to be was a link to resources. So in my eyes, it kind of was a phone number, much of which the phone number that Community Outreach Services already does. It's a one-stop shop to refer to external resources. And I see this being really valuable for, on top of what we already do and what we already have existing in Alberta and existing in Jasper, and for some consistency nationally. I think that's specifically of great importance as we do move often as a society. So I think that I would put my support behind this. I'd like to learn a little bit more about it, perhaps a presentation of some sort to have as much information as possible, but I certainly wouldn't stand in the way of adding more supports to Canadians.
Thank you for that, Councillor McGrath. Although I certainly agree that such supports should be available, and if we can in some way offer some assistance to get those supports available to residents of Jasper, I think it's a wonderful step forward. I am a little confused by the motion itself. It appears that the federal government has already passed the motion, so I'm not sure why further support is now needed to pass a motion that has already been passed. I don't understand exactly how it's to be funded. The CRTC apparently is involved. I know there was a time when we looked at 911 for our community, and that was approved but financed through an additional charge on everybody's telephone bill, as I recall. So it's possible that this will be similarly funded. I'm not sure, and I agree with Councillor McGrath that it'd be nice to have some of those details, but they are probably not critical in the overall support for a motion. I think having a dedicated 3-digit number to call for people in crisis is a good idea, and I will support that, but it's already been passed by the look of things, so we'll see. Mr. Gibbon.
Your Worship, yeah, I think an important point, and you do have to look a little bit closer into MP Soroka's letter. It does say that the House of Commons has passed a motion introduced by a Conservative MP. And so I think that suggests that while the House of Commons has passed a motion, that is not the same as the Government of Canada passing a bill or changing legislation. So there is essentially an endorsement from the Parliament and the MPs that are gathered there that passed with the majority of support, but it was not a government bill or motion. And so if I am, and I am interpreting slightly here, if I was interpreting, I think MP Soroka is looking to see whether or not there's an interest in demonstrating that this is a widely supported concept, so that it might encourage the current government, the sitting government, to establish the bill or law that would be required to actually activate it. So essentially the Parliament said, we think this is a good idea. The government has not necessarily taken action on it, I think is what I am interpreting from the letter.
And that may be an entirely fair interpretation, although the analogy then might be someone asking people to write to our administration saying, well, council has passed the motion, now we want you people to do something about it. I would have thought that was a bit of a given, but pardon the pun. Councillor Butler.
Thank you. Well, I guess if I'm in for a penny, I'll go in for the pound on this whole question of boundaries of municipal governments. I find it, I support entirely having the National Mental Health Hotline, Suicide Prevention Hotline. It's just such a strange request to have received this as a one-off. I don't know if we have ever received such a request from a representative in opposition in the federal federal government to support a particular federal initiative. It's such a odd request to me, I have to say. I have great respect for Mr. Soroka. I agree with Mr. Given's assessment of what is being hoped to accomplish, but I'm still left with this little bit of a slippery slope concern around municipal councils being asked to either support or oppose particular initiatives of higher levels of government. It's an odd ask to me. I can't help but be in support, and I certainly do see the benefit to our residents as residents of any community. A direct benefit, yes. But it is odd to me to be asked this, and I wonder if municipal governments can expect to see more of these sorts of requests in future to support in particular initiatives of particular sectors or parties or groups within higher levels of government.
Thank you, Councillor Butler. Councillor DeMota.
I understand where Councillor Butler's coming from, and it does make sense to me. And you know, even with regards to the other matters that we discussed on, you know, councils making or supporting decisions, and I think this one's a little different. The fact that Mr. Soroka is representing his constituents, and you know, our council, we represent people in our community, and you know, I think that I agree. Like, I really enjoy having Mr. Soroka there, and he's represented us well over time. And I think that when he's asking us for support, it's good to take an in-depth look and understand why it's coming here. And I think it's just it's a broad question for us to answer and you know, gauge what we think that our residents might be appreciative of. And I think this is an easy one for me. I'm not saying that supporting is right or wrong, but I do understand the comments, and yeah, I think we might down the road see a little bit more of this, and I don't have a problem. Thank you.
Councillor McGrath.
Being that there seems to be some consensus among council, I would be willing to make a motion that council endorse the 988 crisis line initiative and direct administration to provide a letter confirming this resolution to MP Soroka.
Thank you, Councillor McGrath. So can I take your motion to be in the form of the draft motion that was presented?
Yes.
Thank you. Speaking to that motion, I can support most of it, but I struggle with the second clause in the preamble. Firstly, I don't know where the 200% increase number comes from. And I am concerned about tying the 988 number to the current pandemic. I think that it is reasonable and necessary to have such a number for suicide prevention in all cases, and including once we get through this pandemic, as surely we will. So why there is, I mean, yes, the pandemic has focused some attention on increasing rates of suicide, but there is a bit of a suggestion in this draft motion that is the purpose of the motion. And I would be more comfortable just deleting that and endorsing the 988 number regardless. Mr. Given.
Thanks, Your Worship. I'm obviously still getting used to the practices of the municipality of Jasper. And I would just say that from the motion made by Councillor McGrath, our interpretation, or my interpretation, would be that really Any letter of support would not necessarily endorse or confirm any of the whereases. As you said, those are the preamble. The active clause that I think Councillor McGrath made in her motion was really the essence of, does council support this idea? It does not necessarily adopt or include in her motion any of the active, any of the preamble or the whereases or the justification. Council does or doesn't support this, and the reasons for that may be some of the ones that are identified here, or council may have others. I think some of them have come up in the discussion here that might be of your own personal experience or observations about the community. So in terms of administration's interpretation, we would, either council has or hasn't supported it, and we would inform MP Soroka of council's action rather than necessarily adopting any of the justification that he provided. We would take it a very sort of neutral approach of, council has made this motion and you are informed of the action that council has made.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Given, and that in fact was my intended point with respect to asking Councillor McGrath about whether her motion reflected the draft motion. If the motion is the operative clause, be it resolved that Council of the Municipality of Jasper endorses a 988 crisis line initiative and directing staff to write a letter, I can support that. If the motion includes the preambles, I've got some trouble. So if Councillor McGrath can confirm that that's where she's at, that's fine with me. Councillor McGrath.
I can confirm the motion for you, Mayor Ireland, that council endorse the 988 crisis line initiative and direct administration to provide a letter confirming this resolution to MP Soroka, leaving out the preamble as suggested.
Thank you. All right, any further discussion? Councillor Keller-Harempy, I can't tell if there's a hand up there. Oh, maybe it's just a shadow. Okay. Thank you. All right, I will call the question then that council endorse the 988 crisis line initiative and direct administration to write a letter. All in favor? There are none opposed. That is carried. Thank you for that. Is there any other new business for council? There appears not. Councillor reports, agenda item 12. Councillor McGrath.
I had a busy week last week of attending community conversation, library meeting, which I will note the library is kind of on pause with creating their budget, waiting on the municipal budget to first come through. That I attended the Municipal Inclusion Committee, as well as a special conversation last week on equitable engagement. Tomorrow I will attend a community conversation as well as a Jasper Community Team Society strategic planning session. And that is all for this week.
Thank you for that. Other reports, Councillor Keller-Harempy.
Last week, I attended the Trans-Canada Yellowhead Highway Board Directors meeting on behalf of Councillor Janot. And on Thursday this week, Councillor Wilson and I have a Community Futures Board meeting by Zoom.
Thank you for that. Councillor Demota.
Thank you, sir. Last Thursday, I attended a Zoom meeting for our Culture and Rec Board. One of the main topics was our bylaw, and I've got some clarification on that. I'd like to thank administration for doing all the work behind getting some of the information. And unfortunately, I think some of it was in vain. Ms. Nadon has directed us to our procedure bylaw, which I think may need some discussion for committee of the whole next week, just for the simple fact I think that we may be looking for terms of reference to to guide us. We've got a lot of new members, and there's a lot of confusion on representation and what we're supposed to be doing with our board. So we've undertaken a little bit of a kind of a mail-in approach on what we feel our purpose should be, and things that we'd like to see come out of the board. You know, understanding that there isn't a lot of programming dollars available for arts, and I think that there's been a bit of a push to see a little bit more of that, and we want to have those discussions. So, not to make this long, some questions came up about the community services review, the services review survey, and I think there's a desire by the board and other members in the community to get those results public and council to finalize you know, what we'd like to see out of that. And if that can come up next week at our committee of the whole, just to discuss what plan of attack we're going to take with finishing that off, I'd like to have that discussion. There was discussion about the skate park with the option of Ball Diamond A, and we'll be waiting for council and administration to come back with more information on that as we move along. And then I think that's about it. Mr. Bridge gave us an update on the arena about where we're at with certain things, and minor hockey looks like it's progressing well. There's a full slate with you know, all the restrictions in place, and more time is being requested for weekends. So down the road, I'd like to hear a little bit of we'd like to hear a little bit more of an update from those guys as well. And that's about it for me. I don't know if council has any requests or administration.
Thank you, Councillor Demota. Mr. Given?
Yeah, Your Worship, I just wanted to make sure that I clearly understood what Councillor Demota was looking for next week. I heard sort of the reference of if we could have more discussion at Council Committee of the Whole next week. And so I just would like to get greater clarity if Council is looking for an additional action or different action than what's currently listed on our outstanding items list. Certainly a review of the Culture and Recreation Committee is the scope of the targeted review that council approved. Administration is intended to come forward, you know, June of 2021. I would imagine that would be earlier June of this year that we would come forward with information. So if there is something additional, different, or sooner, I guess I would just be seeking some greater clarity on specifically what it is that's being asked for, and if that is a direction from all of council. If it's something relatively minor, I'm happy to talk to Councillor Demota offline. But if there's something different than what's provided in the motion action list, I guess I'd like to have some discussion about that with all of council.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. Councillor Demota?
I can work behind the scenes on that. I think we just need to get in terms of reference for the Culture and Rec board, and I can get that back with our group, and I'll just work with Ms. Nadeau and Mr. Given and Ms. Franklin to get that to the board, and then we can have a broader discussion on that. I think the only thing that I would ask is maybe have a discussion, maybe not have administration bring anything forward, but just where council sits with our services review survey. I think we need to finalize that.
Thank you for that. Councillor McGrath?
Thank you. Councillor Demota, just for clarification, are you looking for council to once again go over the Culture and Recreation Services review that we started last year? COVID kind of put a pause on it. So we were doing some workshops. Is that what you're hoping for us to kind of reignite?
Well, maybe you're just to get an update on where we're at, because with everything that's happened, and then with the budget coming into play, I'm kind of foggy on where we ended up because I thought we were going to finalize everything with the group that established the survey for us. And
No.
I believe they were waiting for council to finalize and approve what they've come up with and have an official document that's presentable to the community. I'm sorry for the confusion on that, but I'm confused as well. So I just wanted to know where we're at and if we can have that wrapped up, if it's possible to do it in the near future. If we've already decided that, what was our timeline?
Councillor McGrath?
If I may add one thing without being able to answer Councillor Demota's question, I'm pretty sure the terms of reference for the Culture and Recreation Board, that would like be in the review that's currently expected to come back to us in June, and possibly uncover what terms of reference would look like or should be in relation to the committees that we asked administration to look closer at. And then in line with that, because Councillor Demota and I are the councillors appointed to the Environmental Committee, are we to hold off and just wait until June for anything to be initiated with the Environmental Committee? I'm pretty sure that's where we're at. I just want some confirmation that we're waiting.
Mr. Given?
Sure, Your Worship. Yeah, I appreciate the discussion. Thanks. Thank you, Council. So I can confirm that a terms of reference would be within the scope of the review of all these three areas, so that we can ensure that there's that consistency. And ultimately, we want to ensure that anybody that participates on those committees has an understanding of why they're there. I think, Councillor Demota, that's really what you're identifying, is that there's a need to understand what the purpose is. And we would think that purpose would be a part of the discussion that we would bring forward in June. Councillor McGrath, I think the same goes for the Environmental Responsibility Committee. I would suggest that council may want to do the work of identifying the purpose of the committee first before really getting active with the committee. And so unfortunately, it is maybe a bit of a holding pattern there until council can have those discussions about how that committee fits in with the overall strategy of council. And then finally, Councillor Demota, thank you. I think you might have been, I guess I'm at least at a high level aware that council have been doing some work with RC strategies. And if that is if you're looking for a status update, then I can do some work with Ms. McNabb to see what we can bring forward. I appreciate that may have been put on pause, as many things were through the pandemic. And if that's work that council is looking to restart, continue, finish, close off, we can help you identify where that is. And yeah, thank you for the discussion. It's helped me understand what we might be able to bring forward.
Thank you for that, Mr. Given. I would endorse a status report on that RC strategies issue as well. So not in-depth discussion, but just a reminder of where we left that and what next steps were anticipated at that time. And for Councillor Demota, in terms of existing relationships with existing committees, such as they are, there are terms of reference for the Culture and Recreation Board embedded in Schedule 3 of our procedure bylaw. And so for the time being, and recognizing that the review is intended to perhaps draft new terms of reference for committees, if the Culture and Recreation Board has any doubt, the existing terms of reference can be found there. And I say that subject to correction by Mr. Given or Ms. Nadon, who are probably closer to it than me. But if there is an immediate question about terms of reference, I think that's where you'll find them. Go ahead, Councillor Demota.
Okay, I appreciate all that, and thank you for clarifying and disseminating some of that confusion. On the topic of the Committee for Environmental Responsibility, just to take a little bit out of what was said, if administration would like to see what council's purpose may be in their work with developing what they need, Would it be okay for Councillor McGrath and I to discuss what that could be and then make our presentation to council for contemplation?
I think you could do that.
All right. Well, we were looking at trying to start somewhere, and it's been ongoing for a couple of years now. So I think any progress that we can make collectively and get it going, and then help admin out and vice versa. I think the more work that we can put into this for you know, a positive outcome, the better.
Right, thank you for that. We are on councillor reports, so I will report briefly that I attended a virtual meeting of the museum board last week, and I'm happy to say that some real progress has been made with respect to strategic framework and clarifying the ongoing confusion between the role of the Jasper Yellowhead Historical Society as opposed to the Jasper Museum and Archives. And so I think we've achieved a degree of clarity and approved a strategic framework moving forward that should help resolve some of that confusion, both at the board level and at the community level. So good work is happening there from my perspective. Just a word of caution as we all live now in this virtual world. The chairman of the board last meeting allowed a presenter to become the host of the meeting to present a report. And when that was concluded, that presenter logged out and we lost our meeting. So because the host was no longer the host and we were all cut off. So just something for those technical people to be aware of. Funny things can happen in the virtual world. And that is my report. If there are no other councillor reports, there is no list of upcoming items unless anyone has anything to draw to the attention of council. And if not, I would invite an application, or pardon me, a motion for adjournment at 11:22 a.m. Councillor Demoda, that is your motion. All in favor? There are none opposed. We are adjourned. Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Gibbon, for a very efficiently run set of presentations.